I've been really looking forward to this panel all week on social media and politics. Let me introduce our panelists, and then we can kick things in, starting with Vincent Harris. He's a digital strategist for the Rand Paul campaign. Vincent, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rand and his dad were masters at using community to really take over. And then Patrick Ruffini, he's the founder of of Echelon Insights. Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
Nice to see you. You're a consultant that works with campaigns on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I founded a company that ran social media for candidates. Now I'm sort of more on the analytics and measuring side
Awesome.
of the equation.
And I understand you have a candidate in the Kentucky gubernatorial election.
I think that might be Vincent.
Oh, is that Vincent? All right.
I do. Yes, I do.
I won't say anything.
Hopefully, we're not going to get into policy. Right.
I just got to tell you, if I were a Kentuckian, my vote would go to this guy, but only because I've known him for years. He was the founder of Fark.com. You saw him many times on the Screensavers, the old Screensavers show. And now he's running for governor. Drew Curtis. Hi, Drew.
How's it going?
Congratulations.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Do you think you might win? I mean, are you trying to win?
Yeah, no, I am trying to win. Both of the candidates are fairly below average and uninteresting and really bad at repeating policy. So I think I've got a pretty good shot.
All right, we won't get into that, Vincent. I'll give you a chance to rebut in a second. Let me ask you, though, we'll start with Drew. How important, I mean, you start as an internet guy. You come to this from the internet. How important is the internet and social media, do you think, to politics this year?
Yeah, so I don't know that most people have figured it out yet, but it's actually extremely vital, especially to independent candidates. And the reason why is, if you think about sort of like how the structure of a political party works, the Democrats and the Republicans are essentially 19th century social networks. They perform exactly the same function. So if you don't have that kind of backing, the only option is to use a social network online, preferably one that doesn't care about politics at all and is more interested in whether or not your message resonates and whether or not you want to reach a lot of people.
Huh, that's really interesting. So, Vincent, what about about what Curtis said? Does this mean that political parties are going to erode in terms of their power and influence as people go more digital and online, or is this are the political parties actually going to continue to leverage these primarily and continue to essentially do end runs around the third-party candidates?
Well, there's a great academic study by a political scientist named Natalie Stroud, and she actually talks about, in a 2010 study, what's called selective exposure. And actually, most voters already have preferences, obviously, before they engage online. They're either conservative and Republican or liberal and Democrat. And most voters are using the internet to seek information out that reinforces their pre-existing congruent beliefs. So if you're Republican and you go online, you're actually going to sites like foxnews.com, and if you're liberal, guess what? You're going to sites like BuzzFeed and CNN and MSNBC. So I would disagree with that statement, but I would say that the internet is incredibly powerful this election cycle. You are seeing campaigns spend much more money than they ever have before on social network sites like Facebook. One of my other clients even just spent money on the first paid political Snapchat filter, which we can talk hopefully a little bit about.
So you mentioned that people are looking for reinforcement or validation for their existing political views, but that's kind of problematic in a couple of ways. One of which, for one reason, the big parties have kind of incompatible, different. We see it in the Republican lineup right now. They have somewhat incompatible positions on various things. So that's one thing that kind of marks against the continued dominance of the major parties. But I also wonder about the fundraising part of it. I mean, right now there's so much money in politics, and billionaire third-party candidates, like as we've seen in multiple races now, can enter in and compete and be in the debates. But how about crowdfunding and other forms of online funding? Is that going to change how politics are essentially monetized?
Well, look, I think we should all be very excited from a pro-democracy perspective about the power of the internet in online fundraising. When I worked for Speaker Newt Gingrich during the 2012 race, we had 178,000 donors online. The night that we won the South Carolina primary, we raised $1.5 million online. That's a lot of money. And the internet is is really allowing candidates who might normally not be able to compete with the more establishment Wall Street folks like Hillary Clinton, I would say, who's really seeing someone like Bernie Sanders do so well online. I mean, he is raising so much money online from small dollar donors on the left, and then you have candidates like Senator Paul and Senator Cruz and Ben Carson who are doing really well, bundling together small dollar donors online too. So really, I think online is obviously key for online fundraising, and it's for fundraising for these campaigns, and it's really serving as a new revenue stream which didn't exist about 10 years ago.
Patrick Ruffini is the founder of Echelon Insights. If you accept that people have made, most people, 90, 80 or 90% have made their decision, Democrat or Republican, left or right, then it's the swing voters that are important. How important is social media, the internet, technology in influencing those swing voters and measuring them?
Yeah, no. So there was actually a study out recently, and I think sometimes we use social as a shorthand for the internet.
Right.
You know, we use it for, and there's really a lot of different things that are happening on the internet. When you talk about the fundraising, most of it happens on email. It doesn't really happen on. There's parts of it that happen on social, but most of it happens on email. And when you talk about persuadable voters and how they're finding information, it's really important to look beyond sort of a Facebook page or look beyond a Twitter channel. And some of these networks are still pretty limited in the number of people they reach, and look at search and look at Google Trends and look at search results and see, there was a study that actually showed that, being number one, owning your Google search result was actually the most important thing in terms of persuading undecided voters who are looking for objective sources of information.
Well, wait a minute. Now, explain that. If I'm searching for Drew Curtis, I'm going to find Drew Curtis. What are you talking about when you're saying being number one on your search?
Well, actually, it's not a given. You see candidates who don't, who have negative articles.
Well, Rick
them.
Santorum is a good example of that.
Right. So, and with this fragmentation of media, we no longer have a Walter Cronkite. We no longer have the big three network news anchors telling us what to think about the election. People are now turning to, Google is now serving that function, and it is almost completely programmatic. I mean, it's programmatic.
Right.
It's the internet itself actually collectively serving that function as opposed to a single voice. And it's sort of been likened to sort of that Google search results page for a candidate has been likened to the Walter Cronkite role in old in sort of the old days.
Didn't we see, Mike, an article that said Google could actually pick the next president by manipulating its search results?
It would be trivial, and Facebook could as well. As we just talked about, 1 billion users in one day.
Yeah.
They easily could, actually. And those algorithms, by the way, are secret and behind the scenes, and we don't know what they're doing. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think something like that could happen if there was a lot of malice or sort of double dealing in these companies. So, Patrick, quick follow-up. Now, of course, I think the conventional wisdom is that television changed the kind of candidate that could win in national elections. Nixon, during the big debates, looked sweaty and shifty, and he had the 5 o'clock shadow. And Kennedy looked fresh and bright, and that, some say, swayed the election. That may be an overstatement, but still, you had to be telegenic from that point on in order to win the presidency or other national offices. Does social media have its own version of that? Do you have to be kind of like somebody like Donald Trump, for example, who's great on social media, who gets lots of attention?
It may be the reason Donald's getting so much attention.
Exactly.
Right now. Yeah.
Is Donald Trump the new Kennedy in terms of being right for his time in social media?
You earned the prize for being the first to mention Donald Trump. I thought I was going to get that. I was actually going to mention that exact same thing. I mean, look at this is a guy who's not running sort of a classic by textbook campaign on any metric, but especially on social media. I mean, he really seems to be posting his own stuff, his own tweets late at night. Sometimes that's pretty questionable, but there's no question about sort of the level of response that he's getting. And look, I don't necessarily look at Donald Trump and see somebody who is, a young, hip, social media savvy person. I look at him and see somebody who is who has been the master for 30 years of manipulating the media whatever medium that is, whether that's TV, and now it's social media. So we're actually seeing, early on it was the early adopters on social who were, different than sort of the old stars we used to see. And now it's sort of, we're seeing more traditional media figures actually dominating and learning how to dominate the new social channels.
Drew Curtis, you're a candidate for governor, I think, because of the internet. Without the internet, I don't think your candidacy exists. Am I right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. In fact, we actually in Kentucky have a history of independents making legitimate runs at the governorship. And the last guy who tried it, I went and talked to people who worked on his campaign. Unfortunately, he passed a few years ago. But they said that one of the things he kept running up against was he was locked out by the mainstream media because he wouldn't buy advertising with him. Right. And it wasn't that he was refusing to. The problem was he just didn't have enough money to do it. And if I was trying to run this campaign 20 years ago, it would be completely impossible. But as luck would have it, understanding how social media works, understanding how to launch things virally in a very subtle way, these are really nuanced skills that allow somebody like me to actually have a legitimate shot at winning.
Do you think this is good for democracy?
I think it is, actually, because it's going to allow other people to get in the game that otherwise wouldn't have. And we're actually seeing that here locally. One of my friends is here locally is a guy who runs a website called Kentucky Sports Radio, who, after conversations this year that he and I have had, he's decided to make a house run at the federal level next year. And this is a guy who, he's not a radio guy, he's an internet guy with a radio show. And I think we're about to see the same thing happen, except in his case, he decided to go with a party.
Vincent, do we need elections anymore? And the reason I ask
is have the guy with the most Twitter followers.
Exactly.
Just win.
Count the likes.
Yeah.
And that's a facetious question, but the real question is, does social media absolutely predict success in elections? Can it predict?
So I would say that simply focusing on the vanity metrics isn't going to predict who wins an election. Just because you have the most likes on Facebook or the most Twitter followers or the most folks on Instagram, that's not going to mean that you're necessarily going to win an election. And even search interest, even looking at a site like Google Trends and then seeing if Donald Trump has spiked to high heaven on Google Trends, will he win? Not necessarily, because all that shows is interest. All that shows is people seeking more information out, not necessarily that they want to engage and actually be a part of this campaign. I would say also that it is so loud out there. It is so loud on social media. And one of the things that we found for Senator Paul, who, by the way, as I was listening to the earlier segment and you were talking about privacy, there's not a better candidate on privacy than Rand Paul. But, it is so loud out there. And the real thing that campaigns need to figure out is how do they break through? Because people on social media are on social media not necessarily to engage with a politician, but to see who's breaking up with who and to look at cat gifs. So we have, it's true. So it's just so important that campaigns are producing content that is entertaining and that will break through the clutter. Because if they're not doing so, then they're not even going to be reaching voters because people now can just easily click off and go back to BuzzFeed.
If I were a cat, I think I'd run for office.
Yeah, you'd have a better shot. Or maybe one of those Eno Shinobu's. Yeah.